Okay, we're going to be talking about shading metallic objects today in charcoal, and we're going to use a subtractive method to do that. So this is the object that I've taken a photo of, and we're going to be shading. As you can see, it's kind of a copper mug, and it's super, super shiny and reflective. So the trick is, and this is the question I get asked all the time in classes, but how do I make it actually look shiny? What do I do to make an object look reflective? There's no one easy answer to that question, but there are a few things to look into. So one would be, I'm going to turn one light off here. So right now I have one spotlight going, and I'm going to look at a simple object like an egg, which is a little bit shiny, but mostly it's a matte object. So as you can see here, if you have one light shining on it, you're going to have mostly light, and then you're going to have a core shadow where it gets the absolute darkest, and the highlight is somewhere way over here. So the highlight and then really slow fade, it's mostly light, a little darker, and then it's not until way over here on the object that you get the deepest dark point. So they're kind of separated from each other, and it's a really slow fade between the light and the dark. Compare that to an object like this mug. So kind of lock this into your mind, the egg here, and I'm going to put that aside. Now in this case, what's different about this? Well, we've got the absolute brightest highlight right here, and it's butting right up against the darkest dark and another really dark point. So the change from light to dark is super compressed and tight, and that's going to become an extreme focal point and something that really steals the show in a good way. Look at how vibrant that is. It really makes it feel shiny, but in order to make this feel glossy and bright, we're going to have to really amp up the darks around it. And so that's one big thing we'll talk about today. So for starters, what I've done is I've already sketched out my mug, so I'm going to let you guys do that on your own time. Now it's really important to note that I've sketched that with the Vine charcoal. Oh, hold on guys, let me hit this extra light so we actually can see this. The Vine charcoal, remember, is the light wispy charcoal that's really easy to blur and smudge, so it makes it easier to erase if you need to make changes. Now that's what I did for starters over here. Now once you've gotten a decent view of your mug sketched out with the Vine charcoal, don't neglect things like the shapes of light and dark. So what I've looked at is in the picture of the mug, you'll see that there's a reflection of the yellow paper that it's sitting on, and it kind of loops up almost like waves, these shapes. That's a big distinction. The main highlight that's really bright is a good distinction to lock in for yourself, just very lightly. It doesn't have to be perfect. I can see a little bit of a reflection of a white shape right over here, so I kind of locked that in. So maybe try to break 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 main zones of light and dark on your mug. That might be a good thing to do. I've also locked in the handle. That I'm not as worried about, to be honest. What I really want to focus on is the main body of this thing. And then don't forget your cast shadow that comes off to the side as well. And the cast shadow, just to show you really quickly, is mainly way over here, but then you get that cast shadow of the handle as well. So it's kind of a double line. So I did all that with Vine charcoal. Now then the main thing you're going to want to do, because we're going to work subtractively today, which means we're going to tone this whole thing with gray and then erase out the lights and add in the dark tones. So it's a different method of working today. But because of that, what I do first, make sure you lock in your proportions, you get it all down with the Vine charcoal. Then I'm going to go to maybe say a hard or a medium pencil, charcoal pencil. That's important. Don't use graphite here. And I'm going to outline back over the important lines. Now you don't have to do this on everything, but the really important lines, and take your time on this. I'm working fast because I'm pretty confident with my line work these days. I've been doing this for a while. But don't go too quickly. Take your time. And what you want to do is outline these with kind of a medium pressure. Don't push crazy hard, but push hard enough that you're digging a line into the page a little bit. Now the reason we do that, check this out. In a minute, we're going to smudge the heck out of these and kind of blend a bunch of charcoal in. I have only used Vine here. I did not outline with the charcoal pencil. And if you notice, when I smear over top of it, that line almost goes away. Not quite, but almost. I've outlined with the charcoal pencil over here, and check out how much bolder that is because I did that. So that's why I used the charcoal pencil on top after you've done all of the basic line work and layout. Now this part, once you've done that, and make sure you follow all those steps, don't skip anything. Once you've done that, you can kind of catch up to me. You can pause the video and get to this point. Now what I'm going to do is take a piece of the vine charcoal and I'm going to tone the whole page, even the background, so kind of a whole rectangle around this object. Now when you go to do that, first use a scrap sheet of paper or something and just give a few swipes to make sure you start to get a nice clean look. That's what we want, is to see like an even kind of a line. Be careful because these vine charcoals bend. If you notice, mine kind of curves this way. So if I were to try to draw here, I'm just going to get 2 marks because it's not laying flat. So find the part of the vine charcoal to where you can actually lay it flat on the page. Now from this point on, I'm going to put a nice even pressure. And don't be timid or shy with this. Like, really lay it on somewhat thickly. Like I said, we're making a kind of rectangular box across this. When you go to do this on a your large sheet of paper for the bigger project, you're going to tone the whole page all the way to the edges. Okay, so it's going to look something like this. Notice because of the tooth of the page, it looks a little bit like static TV. You see all that white and black mixture. Now this is where a cotton cloth or a chamois cloth can really come into play. So the chamois looks something like this. Mine's all dirty. Chamois are great because they absorb a lot of the charcoal and they're really good for a light tone. A cotton rag or a paper towel is going to push your charcoal more into the page and make it a little bit darker. The chamois is almost like a vacuum and it sucks up some of the charcoal. So for starters, just because I'm not sure how dark I want this, I'm going to go with the chamois first. And what's awesome about this is I don't have to press very hard. And look at that like smooth, even tone that I've got. It's kind of really easy to do with a chamois cloth. It makes it look easy. And that's the beauty of the chamois. Okay, so that's an even tone, but it's not really dark. I don't want it to be crazy dark, but I want it to be dark enough that I can erase out a highlight. So let's just test it out. My highlight was right in here. This is just a kneaded eraser. It looks lighter than the rest, but not aggressively lighter. So I'm going to do this one more time. And now, just to show you the difference a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and use my cotton rag, which at this point, this stage of the game, it's gotten to be pretty gross. It's got a lot of old charcoal and maybe even some graphite in there embedded. But this, I'm not pressing really hard, just enough to smooth this out a little bit. And this, I think, is going to get me where I want to be, which is just a little bit darker as a background. If you notice, I'm just kind of dancing around that little highlight spot. I'm just not pushing in too hard there since I know it needs to be light anyway. Beautiful. Okay, now we've got ourselves a pretty even tone. Not bad, not perfect, but good enough. So you want to make sure it's fairly even. It doesn't really do you any good to make this really patchy and I don't know, that static TV look. That'll just be distracting in the end. Our goal is just a nice light gray wash across the whole page. So now that we've gotten that, I'm just going to do a couple quick things. Just for the sake of you guys being able to see where I'm at, I'm going to just darken up a few key areas just a bit. So this ellipse at the top of the mug, sure, why not? The edges of the mug, the handles, like I said, I'm not too worried about, but I'll just give you a sense of where that outer boundary of the handles are. Okay, outer edge of the mug, I think we can see that pretty well. And then we were starting to lose some details. Beautiful. Now, there was a little bit of highlight here. So I want to make sure I keep that light. There was an area that's a little lighter in this reflection of the yellow table. And there was a little extra highlight right here that kind of followed the curve of the mug. So I want to showcase all that stuff. This is all stuff that I had drawn in, but I just washed it away a little bit with my chamois cloth. Okay, good enough for now. Okay, so before we start shading, I just wanted to show you the importance of your light source when you're drawing these. So later on, you guys are going to set up your own drawing, and what's really incredibly important is how you kind of rig up your whole lighting setup. So I've got a couple images here. The first one that I'm going to show up on the screen was one I took with no light, kind of back in the shadows. The lights were off in the room. And you notice that wouldn't be great to draw from. It's a little too low light. There's still some reflection shown in the mug, but not really all that dynamic. The next one I've included a spotlight on the mug, which, so the lighting isn't bad here. I could make a good drawing out of this, but it just didn't seem to showcase the shininess of my mug. So what I did was took one more where I lowered my clamp light a little bit and kind of tried to shine it right on the edge of my copper mug. And that really, as you notice, showcased that like super bright highlight and the distinction between light and shadow right in this area. And I liked that the best. So when you're photographing really anything, but especially shiny objects, keep that in mind, that it becomes really important how your lighting works. And lighting's really everything when you're doing a value drawing anyway. No matter what the subject is. So getting back into this, really it doesn't matter which way you start your drawing. You could erase out the highlights first, or you could add in the shadows first. Sorry guys, I'm losing all my materials here. But so you could do either one first. I'm going to erase out and just kind of map out my highlights a little bit at least. So I've got three main erasers I'll be working with. The Kneaded Eraser, which is pliable, right? It's great because you can bend it into any shape you want and kind of erase out small areas. The Pink Pearl, which is a little more aggressive and does similar things, but maybe just works a little differently. It also has a nice sharp ridge to it, which is nice for details. And then when you really want to get some details and kind of draw in some of your highlights, the retractable eraser is great for getting into a fine detail. So just to show you real quick, there's two nice highlights along the rim of the glass. One floats right up here above my main highlight on the vertical plane. And if you notice, I'm just able to kind of draw into the gray tone of the paper and pull out a nice highlight along the rim. So already that looks way shinier and kind of like it's in light just by doing that. It's crazy. And then there's also a light that kind of ping pongs over this way. So if the light's coming from over here, it's catching there and also about here. So I'm going to go back here and showcase a little bit of that light reflection as well. So this is why we call it reductive, or it's kind of like inverted drawing, because sometimes you can draw with the eraser, which is great. So already that has a bit of a metallic feel to it. Now on this big highlight right here, I'm going to use the Kneaded Eraser to start with. I like this. It seems to do the best job of kind of sucking up the charcoal to begin with. So there's kind of a big light and then a bit of a streak downhill, something like that. Now then we could go with the Pink Pearl and really try to pull up as much of that as possible. It just does a bit of a better job of bringing back the white of the paper. Now if you went really heavy with your gray tone, the white of the paper, it might not feel quite as bright as it should, quite as white as it would have been before we toned it. It's always going to have a little bit of that feel, but if you're really struggling to bring up the light or bring up the charcoal, one thing is use a little elbow grease. Don't be afraid to really dig in with these erasers. Like, you've got to put some muscle in there. But aside from that, if you just can't get it, we will be able to, toward the end of the work, come back in with some white charcoal if we really absolutely have to. One thing to notice right away, I'm just blowing away some of the eraser poop that the white rubber and pink rubber erasers leave. That's one thing I really love about the Kneaded Eraser. It never leaves that chunky eraser dust that I have to blow off or that messes up the drawing later on. So keep that in mind. That's a little bit of an advantage to the Kneaded Eraser. And it does a pretty good job, actually. Okay, so erasing out a highlight over here. Cool. So those are the main really, really bright spots that I want to get. Since those are the absolute brightest brights, and this is a really light gray, I want to start to think about adding some darks in as well. So one of the most important dark areas that I can think about adding soon is actually background, to start to make this thing pop a little bit. So So there's two stages to the background. The yellow paper, it's like construction paper it's sitting on, and then the black vertical, whatever it was, wall back there. So I'm going to start with that dark wall, and I'm just using the vine charcoal, the big wide side of it. Now, what I'm not really going to do too much is rub or blend this in. When I try to smooth it and blend it, a lot of times it lightens up, and I don't really want that. Right now, I just want to lock this in a loose way. And what it's really going to help with is I want to get as dark as I can with the vine charcoal way back here, because look at how we start to give ourselves an edge against our glass or our mug. That's what we want to start seeing. And even with this big blocky charcoal, you can get pretty specific with your edges. It just takes a little bit of training your arm and your eyes, but just kind of becoming confident with the charcoal in your hand. And you can really clean up those edges pretty tightly. You don't need a charcoal pencil or anything like that. Okay, so going along the edge here, I'm going to try to avoid the handle as much as I can. Although, like I said, that handle, it's a detail, so we can get back to that later on. It's not the most important thing right now. Okay, so already you've got figure, ground, which is great. Object, background. Some of the next darkest area is going to be this opening, kind of the mouth of the glass. Now, since this is just the beginning and it's kind of loose, I'm being pretty messy with this. I shouldn't say messy. I'm being loose with it. Messy has like a negative connotation. I'm not trying to be sloppy with it. I'm still trying to be pretty precise in where I'm putting my tones, but I'm trying to go quickly. There's no point in making this perfect is what I guess I'm trying to get at, because it's all going to get changed as we build through this drawing. So there's no way to start a charcoal drawing really, really tight and keep it that way. Just remember that drawings can always get tighter the further along you go. They're not going to really get any looser as you progress through them. So better to start loose and then bring the tightness in later. So I've now got that deep background. I've got the dark opening of the jar or cup. So here's the cool thing about this metallic object. The top half above this wavy line reflects the darkness around the object up here. And this shape that's lighter is actually the yellow paper that it's sitting on reflected up into the mug. And so this line here is a distorted view of this change from black to yellow. And this line here is a distorted view of black to yellow. So keep that in mind when you're shading, that the reason it's darker up here is because it's reflecting the environment, the upper environment this mug is. Now this is a weird moment where this edge of the mug is actually going to disappear for a second, and we're going to just roll with that. It's okay. So what I'm now starting to do is darkening the areas around the highlights a bit. And this goes back to what I was talking about in the beginning of the drawing, that there's more of a compression between the light highlights and the darker tones. They're closer to each other than they would be on something like a sphere or an egg, cubes, objects like that. So that's what's going to really make this feel highly reflective. If you can get a big jump between highlight to medium tones to really dark, all kind of happening in a quick way. All right, and then last but not least, I want to think about this yellow paper back here and the mug itself. So we could start with either one, but I think it's always smart to play with the background a little bit first. So this is really important. The light's coming from this side. That's why your highlight is so strong here. And there's actually, if you noticed, I was erasing a little bit with a clean finger. You can also come in here and scratch out a little bit with the kneaded eraser. There's a little bit of a lighter highlight. Now it's not as bright as this, but it's lighter in this area corresponding to our highlight up here. And it kind of gets darker as we wrap around the mug. So I just am erasing a little bit to kind of showcase that lighter portion of this lower part of the mug. Now the same thing happens on the ground plane too. The light's coming in and hitting really boldly right through here. So the lightest part of our ground, I'm going to use the kneaded eraser again, happens to be somewhere around here. It's awfully bright. So I'm erasing out just a little bit. I don't want it to be pure white, but I'm just trying to get back to the lightest gray I can. Now then, as we move away from there, there's a soft gradient, like a soft fading or fizzling of the light as it gets darker and darker away from our subject matter. So by the time we're way out here, it's okay to lay down a bit of this vine charcoal. Now that's way too dark right now, but I can come in with my cloth, fade it out a little bit. You can use your hand if you need to. I don't want this to be really abrupt. I just want it to feel like slowly as we're working our way back in space, back here, and the way out to the right, we're getting further from the light, which means that that yellow paper is actually getting a little bit darker and darker as it recedes away from the light. Okay, that's not bad. It's starting to happen there. If that feels too dark to you, just remember that this is actually going to get much darker down the road. Because we haven't even been dealing with compressed charcoal yet. So same thing over here.
Beautiful.
Okay, if you notice, I totally wiped out this handle over here. No big deal at all. We can bring that back in later. A lot of times you can draw with a clean finger like I just did. You can erase back and bring that handle back into this area. It's way easier to work from back to front than it is vice versa. So if I made this handle perfect and then had to color around it, it would just be a nightmare, this whole drawing, if I did that the whole way. So if you notice, that's why I've been laying background first and then building up the object for the most part. Not always, but just make sure that you don't fall into that trap of I'm going to render the heck out of this thing and then realize, oh, I haven't put any environment around my object. It's never a good idea. Last thing I'm going to do is just darken, like we talked about before, the curve of this mug. So as we move away from this highlight, it'll get slightly darker here toward the corner. Definitely darker way over on this left side. All right. So getting somewhere now. Not saying that this thing is by any means finished, but the base tones are pretty much finished now. Now, if you notice what I just did, keep in mind and be careful of this. This vine charcoal is super wispy, so notice how your fingerprints, if a cat comes up and runs on, across your paper, I mean, if you just look at it sideways, this charcoal goes away really fast. So vine charcoal is great to work with early on, but we're going to have to layer back over this with compressed and with your charcoal pencils. So this is just phase one, a good phase one. You know, it's a solid basis for us, but now we're going to start to dig in with the compressed charcoal and really start to manipulate these values more.